Okay. Anyone else have anything they'd like to add? Yes, Caroline, to you.
I think one important thing is that Poland and the rest of the CEE countries they'll have to adopt the euro eventually. And previously it was always viewed in terms of what are the benefits. Now it will also be viewed in terms of what are the costs. And that will be very valuable long term. It will impact how Poland and the other countries think about the appropriate exchange rate level for eventual euro adoption. They will think more about structural cohesion between themselves and the Western European countries. And it's something difficult to quantify right now, but will prove to be very important in the future.
Okay, let me go back to something else in the title of this panel, which is Europe's policy dilemmas, economic policy dilemmas. Now, one of the big dilemmas or debates at the moment is growth versus austerity. Does this region or the different examples in this region have something to contribute to that debate in the Eurozone and in Southern Europe? We've seen different models here. Poland kind of did the growth first, had a bit of a fiscal loosening, and then did the fiscal tightening. And Polish officials have said to me, we got it right because we ensured we kept the growth going. The Baltic states did very severe austerity, but have now bounced back. They say they got it right because you've got to take the pain early. We've had the Romanian example as well. Is there anything we can conclude from these different models or examples, and that could be lessons for Eurozone periphery countries? Anyone have any thoughts on that? Gillian, would you like to
I think
talk about that?
when we look at the Eurozone context, one of the things that this region has in its favour is the very low level of public debt to GDP. In the vast majority of countries, I think Hungary is really the only exception. But it's not only even post-crisis a particularly low level of public debt to GDP. It's the fact that the vast majority of countries are 2 to 3 years ahead of the euro area in terms of what needs to be done on fiscal tightening. In most countries, the vast majority of the hard work in terms of fiscal tightening and the negative impact that has had on economic activity is either already behind us, or by the end of this year, really the vast majority of that will be behind us. As a house, we expect a decent chunk of these countries to show declining public debt to GDP this year, and as we look further ahead, they're much closer to showing declining public debt to GDP than the Eurozone is. In terms of the different experiences across the region, I think what you see from countries like the Baltics and countries like the Romania is that front-loading is important. Do the difficult, tough measures up front. It does come at a growth cost, but it is necessary. I think the other point that should be made is that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. The euro area will struggle more to the extent that the levels of outstanding debt are much higher. But the rebound that we saw in Baltic economic activity last year, I'm not sure anybody would have forecast back in 2008, 2009. The ability of a country like Poland to very, very quietly widen its budget deficit, but then actually pull it in very rapidly to the extent that it's no longer a concern for investors at this point, or for many investors at this point in Poland, I think again is very impressive and stands to how much hard work the region has done over the last couple of years.
Anyone else like to address that?
Yes, I mean, there are really two reform episodes which are of relevance, I think, in this region for the Eurozone currently. There's this one, and then there's, of course, the much earlier one, the post-communist transition, which I think in many ways has much more bearing over the future evolution of where the euro area is going to go. So there have been, if you look at a country like Bulgaria, in many ways they were facing very similar challenges to what Greece is facing today. And this is also the way that, for example, the IMF thinks about the situation in Greece, belatedly after they'd done some work there for 2 years and didn't get very far. But the example that was set then was it may take a very long time for countries to undergo a wholesale restructuring of the workings of the economy. This may mean an extended period of pain, which was unavoidable then to a certain extent, and which is unavoidable now. And I think the the key challenge that policymakers face is to really make the economically expedient or the economically efficient somehow politically palatable. And that's also, I think, where I think the lessons to some extent end. The political environment does continue to be very different on average in many of the southern European countries from what it was in Eastern Europe. And that is unfortunately one of the key uncertainties that investors currently face, and it's one of the reasons why they're swinging from brief periods of euphoria to excessive periods of panic. And I don't think that's going to go away over the next period, over the next couple of years, which by definition will mean we will see large swings and continued low liquidity in many of these markets.
Radosław Boris, if you'd like to add to that.
I would link the FX regime component to your question about growth versus austerity, because you mentioned the Baltics versus Poland, and then what's happened, the cost of the fiscal consolidation in the Baltics was double-digit growth contraction. In Poland, what's happened is that the flexible FX regime allowed Poland not to be forced into the fiscal austerity at any cost. And because, as I said before in my introductory remarks, 10% currency depreciation boosts growth by about 1% of GDP. And then this, I think, gave basically the flexible FX regime gives you more flexibility in terms of fiscal policy. And I think you can see that very clearly comparing Polish example with the Latvian, for example.
That brings me on to another question, which is assuming that the Eurozone does survive, and we have to make some big assumptions now, assuming the Eurozone survives, European policymakers do the right thing in the way that Jim talked about, start acting as European policymakers, and embrace a greater degree of fiscal union, political integration. Should Central Eastern European countries still automatically be looking at their future as part of the Eurozone, as part of the single currency? Because we have had the example of Poland, which benefited greatly from having a flexible exchange rate. As Jim and others know, in the UK there's a certain amount of sort of backslapping about how clever we were to remain outside of the Eurozone and keep our flexible... Sorry?
Can I?
Yes.
I can't stop thinking, listening to all of this, that without being rude to most of the Polish audience, maybe Britain should send a few thousand English plumbers over here to learn something. Because if you look at, I think from the numbers these guys said, as insulated as Poland is, Poland's exposure to trade is bigger than the UK's. And here, Poland's walked straight through all of this, and the UK economy in the first quarter of this year is weaker than the Eurozone. So it's pretty interesting to hear what these guys say about this.
Yeah. So let's look at that question. Should Central Eastern European countries be looking at their destiny still in a repaired Eurozone, let's say?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Germany benefited greatly from joining the Eurozone. I mean, had it had its own currency, it wouldn't have been able to benefit on that side. And after all, the Eurozone membership is part of the whole EU setup. We all knew right from the beginning that it had to happen with fiscal union. It didn't. That was the biggest policy mistake. So from that point of view, I think Western Europe can learn a lot, as Gillian was saying, from public sector debt point of view. The IMF, the European Union, the US were telling emerging markets for decades, get your debt down, pay your debt down. That's exactly what happened. And the exposure that we have actually in Western Europe and the Eurozone is because countries could borrow in their local currency abroad. This was not possible in Central and Eastern Europe because you had flexible exchange rates in most cases. And that was the risk scenario. And the second thing, just to wrap up on because you were talking about the IPO summit, one very positive thing is that, some see this as positive, some are negative, is that globally corporates have record cash levels. In Germany, corporates have 350 billion euros of cash. US corporates have 700 billion euros of dollars of cash, and apparently in the UK it's about 700 billion pounds. So we're talking about $2 trillion of cash. There's plenty out there. If you can attract this cash, I think is the best thing. And obviously an IPO summit like this is the main thing to go for that direction. And in Q3, Q4, the hope is that we'll start to see companies spending this cash more.
I'm getting a signal that our time is up. Anyone else want to add a final word? Yes. Ben.
I would take the totally opposite view here. In my view, the key to success for emerging markets is to establish the largest policy room possible and use it wisely, be it monetary or fiscal. That means relinquishing your monetary policy is, in most cases, a big mistake for emerging markets. So I would vote against no addition to the Eurozone for Central Europe later on.
An interesting note perhaps for us to finish on. Thank you very much indeed to all the panelists. I think we managed to cover a lot of ground in this session, taking a good look at the many things that Central Eastern European countries have done right in the last few years and the lessons that they still have to learn from the Eurozone, from the mess that has been made by some of the Eurozone countries. As Jim has pointed out, I think we have a lot to admire Poland and other countries in this region for. Many thanks indeed to all of you for taking part in the discussion. Thank you.
Dziękuję bardzo serdecznie. Many thanks for this interesting discussion. Mr. Benoit Anne from Société Générale Corporate and Investment Banking, Mr. Simon Keanu Evans from ING, Mr. Ibrahim Rahbari from Citi, Mr. Colin Grady from Deutsche Bank, Mrs. Gillian Edgeworth from UniCredit, and Mr. Julian O'Neill from Goldman Sachs Asset Management, Mr. Radoslav Borys from PKO Bank Polski, and the moderator Neil Buckley from Financial Times.